all three fins have been sanded now, and so to attach these, I'm going to use wood glue. White glue will also work. Alright, now in the instructions, we're not going to do this exactly flush, so we need to make a mark at 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters from the aft end of each of the cluster tubes. Okay. Alright, and that is where the aft edge, the trailing edge of the fin should go. So that's going to go in like that. Okay, so here I'm going to run a bead of glue right along the finished edge of the root edge there. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and apply this at my mark. I'm going to pull this back off again and then wait 30 to 60 seconds for that glue to become tacky. Now that my glue is a little bit tacky, we can go ahead and put this back on. Again, making sure we're at our mark there. Okay, push that in firmly, let the glue attach. And then we're going to check this. So the fin should be perpendicular between the two tubes. Alright, and once you've got that on straight, go ahead and just let this sit and dry for at least 15 minutes before going on to the next fin. Now for the launch lug, you can actually attach this either before or after you put the fins on. It kind of depends on where you are in the fin process. So if you're waiting for glue to dry, or you're waiting for the sanding sealer to dry, or if you're waiting for your fin paper to finish adhering, you can go ahead and do this, or you can wait and do it after the fins have been attached. I do recommend that you put this launch lug somewhere on the main body tube here where it's in line with one of the motor mounts. And that way you won't have any chance of getting where a fin is going to be. So first I'm just going to make a little mark here. Now in the instructions they really don't show making an alignment mark, but I just find it easier that way. So I'm going to use my fin alignment guide here. And just by chance, I've kind of lined up with the vent hole there. So I'm just going to run a line all the way down. You can always erase it later. And then, according to our instructions, we need to place that at 8 millimeters from the aft end of the main body tube. Okay, so I'm just going to get my ruler in here. If you bump it up a little bit, it won't hurt it. The reason for this is that if you use the recommended paint and decal scheme, one of the black wrap decals goes across this region here. Okay, so I'm just going to take my launch lug here and use it as a guide to find where my other end is. And here, if you want better adhesion, you can go ahead and sand along that line. Okay, so I'm just going to take a little bit of sandpaper here. I'm using 150 grit. You can use just about anything from about 80 to 220. Because all you're doing here is removing the glossy layer from the tube. And that's going to make the glue adhere better. If you want, you can do the same thing with your launch lug. Just go down one side of it here, make a rough edge. Okay, and then when you are ready, take your glue. I'm going to run a bead of glue here. Alright, you don't need that glue to be really heavy. In fact, it dries quicker if you don't. And then we'll reinforce it later by putting on a fillet. Alright, so here, the reason I've got my line then is it's going to make this a lot easier to sight down and ensure that everything is straight. So now I'm going to sight down the rocket here. And I'm sighting through that launch lug, and it should be parallel with my motor mount tube and the body tube and my line, and it does appear to be so. And so now I'm just going to let that dry, and then I can come back a little bit later on and apply the fillets. My fins and my launch lug are dry, and so now the last thing to do is to put fillets on the launch lug here. And then the fins, you can optionally put fillets on there because of the way they fit in between the tubes here. The tubes actually provide the strength that a fillet would. And then it's just a matter of preference if you want to put that in here. And the same thing with between the tubes here. So they don't need fillets, and the instructions don't recommend them. But if you prefer a smoother joint here, that's fine as well. So on my launch lug, I'm just going to apply some more glue here. Have some tissues ready. Okay, and I'm just going to run a bead of glue here right along the length, and then smooth that in. Okay, and then the same thing. The glue on this side isn't quite dry, but I think we can go ahead and do this anyway. Alright, and then let that fully dry. And then I'm going to come back here in probably about half an hour or so, and then we'll do the final assembly. While we're waiting for the body tube and the cluster mount to dry once more, we can go ahead and work on the parachute. So we're going to open that up, and according to the instructions, this gets tied onto the screw eye of the payload bay. Okay, and so to do that, we're going to gather up the 3 loops here on one finger. Okay, just gather those up so they balance, and then using your other finger, find the center point of the parachute sheet. Okay, and then just pull on these loops of the shroud lines until the corners there are all about in the same spot. Now, you can do this in one of 2 ways. You can do it by the instructions, in which case you're going to put the collected shroud line loops through that screw eye, open that up, and then pass the entire parachute through, and then pull that down to firm it up into a knot on the screw eye itself. Now, if you've seen any of my videos, you'll know I don't like to do that. So instead, I'm going to take that back off. Okay, refine the balance point between all the shrouds and the corners here. And now I'm going to use a screw eye, or excuse me, a snap swivel here. This is the same type you'd find in fishing stores or the sporting goods areas of department stores and such. The size doesn't really matter, except that the snap part of it here that actually attaches has to be big enough that when you put it through the screw eye, it still freely moves. Okay, so here, this does not come with the kit. You do have to buy that extra. Alright, but now I've gathered up all my shroud lines into a little tiny loop there. I'm going to pass that through the swivel end of the snap swivel. Okay, and then reopen the loops. So now my snap swivel is just hanging there. I'm going to take that entire swivel, pass it through the loops, and then pull the loops downward, and then taut, so that they're now tightly bound onto the swivel side there. I'm going to recheck and make sure my shroud lines are still the same length and my corners are all about where they should be, and they are. Once you have that exactly where you want it, then go ahead and put a little dab of glue on the knot to keep that from moving on you. Okay. Now if they weren't where you want them exactly, you can loosen the knot, reposition the shroud lines, and then try again. Okay. And then once that has dried, you'll be able to stick it down inside. I'm just going to attach it here. So now we simply attach the snap part onto the screw eye. Don't put this actually down into your body tube until this is dried here. But this gives us the advantage of being able to change out parachutes very quickly, so that maybe your payload is a little bit heavier than usual. You might want to put a little bit bigger chute on. Or maybe it's really windy out and you don't want the chute to carry your rocket off. You could put a big streamer on in its place. The other thing this does is you'll notice that even without launching this, the shroud lines tend to twist. Okay, and when it does get launched and come down on the parachute, either the body tube tends to twist around or the parachute tends to twist around. And if that goes unchecked, it'll actually twist itself all the way up to the top of the chute and potentially collapse the parachute. Okay, having the swivel in there helps release that torsion and prevents this from twisting up as much. While we're still waiting for glue to dry, I do want to make a few comments about the nose cone here. This is a 3D printed nose cone, and so you can see it has a particular texture to it. The paint scheme, if we go back to the box here, includes a black payload section and nose, and then an orange main body there. And of course you can paint this any color you want. But with the nose cone here, you may want to have some consideration about how you want to treat this. I actually kind of like the texture that the 3D printer imparts to this. It gives it kind of a machined look. And if you're going to go with a black color scheme, you could just leave this completely alone and fly it the way it is. If you want a smoother finish though, or you want to change color, then you may want to consider filling in the texture here. And there are a few ways you can do that. One is you can take some 15-minute epoxy and thin it about 1:1 with rubbing alcohol. And that sounds strange, but it's something I saw on another rocket kit, and I tried it myself. It actually works fairly well. The drawback is it takes it about a day to fully cure and be ready to sand, but it gives you a fairly smooth finish even without the sanding. Okay, another way you can do this is to use something like the plastic contour putty, like this. Okay, this is a water-based putty for plastic models, and so you can just use your finger and just smear this in all the way around, let it dry, and then sand it. And then a third way is to use a filling sandable primer. And most of the major spray paint companies make some form of this. And what you do with that is you spray it on a few coats and then sand out most of the rest of it, and it just fills in the grooves in the material. It often takes anywhere from 2 to 5 coats depending on how smooth you want your finish. Okay, so those are just some ideas there. And then once you've got this finished the way you want to, then give it a primer coat and then several overcoats of whatever color you want. Okay. Again, with the payload section, if you're going to paint this black like the box's color scheme, you could leave the nose off or put it on, okay, if you're going to paint the nose anyway. But in this case, go ahead and give it a primer coat, and then again a few overcoats of whatever color you want that. And then the same will be true of the main body. Now that my fillets are mostly dried, we can go on to the final assembly here. Now, depending on how you plan to paint this, you may want to keep the final assembly set aside until after you paint. And so if we look at the box here, right, it's a very basic paint job, so if you want to go with the suggested look, the entire main part of the rocket here is going to be orange, and then the entire payload assembly and nose cone are going to be black. Now again, you can paint yours however you like to, but once you got them painted, again, especially if you're doing a two-tone paint, you might want to keep them separate. But before you launch, however you paint it, we do need to make sure that we go in and attach the shock cord here. Okay, and we'll do that just by tying a double knot through this screw eye. Now, I'm not going to do the full tie on here because I do want to paint this later. Alright, but 2 half hitches or double knot there, and then pull both of those tight. And as I say, I'm not going to go that final step. And then I also suggest once you've got this tight and in position, go ahead and put just a little bit of glue on the knot and then cut back this free end to about 1/4 inch or about 6 millimeters. Okay, and then from there, if you are ready to launch, you're going to need to put some wadding in here and then simply fold up the parachute, put in the shock cord, put it all together, and it's ready to go. Okay, unlike many of Rocketarium's kits, this one does not have an ejection baffle in it, so you will need to use wadding. Okay, I am not going to paint this because currently we have freezing rain here in Arkansas, so for the purposes of this video, we're going to call this good. Have a safe launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.